Judging from past reception on this channel, it seems like you guys enjoy when I talk about Sonic Adventure games and Jet Set Radio games. Personally, I thought you guys liked when I just talk about Dreamcast games, but those videos don't seem to do well. Aside from that, I figured that I should look at more things about Jet Set Radio and Sonic Adventure, starting with Jet Set Radio. If you're familiar with me, you know that I love to dick ride Jet Set Radio a lot. As much as I rave and rant about how good Jet Set Radio is and how much I love the series, what if I told you there is one game in the series that I don't love that much at all?
Jet Grind Radio!
This game, it's not good. Okay, it's not as simple and short as that, as I do have something to discuss about this game. Quite a lot to say, as I realized whilst I'm writing the script for this video. Some good, 99% bad. For those of you who aren't 100% familiar about the series, Jet Set Radio at its heart is a 3D platformer. It may not be as traditional as something like Mario or Sonic, but its core gameplay requires a lot of jumping and acrobatic maneuvers in a 3D environment to accomplish objectives. You're not going to get very far in this game if you don't know how to grind from rail to rail, much like you wouldn't get far driving a car if you didn't know how to steer properly. Being that this game was originally on a Dreamcast that is now being squeezed onto a GBA cartridge, sacrifices and changes would need to be made to its graphics, sound, gameplay, and overall presentation. Ports like these are known as demakes, an adaptation of a game on weaker, older, or limited hardware. Being that the GTA is not particularly known for its 3D cutting-edge graphics, one of the things you'll notice immediately in conjunction with its limitations is that the game has switched to an isometric view to compensate for this. Personally, I enjoy isometric views in games because I find it, somewhat aesthetically pleasing to my eyes when I like being able to peer into the game as if it was some sort of elaborate diorama. But in this instance, I find it awkward and unappealing, which I'll get to later. Upon researching the development for this game, I found out that Vicarious Visions team, who are mostly in charge of this port, reused a previous game engine that was created for the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games on the GBA. It's easy to spot the similarities in how it plays from each other, and from watching some gameplay online, it seems like, Tony Hawk plays quite well on a handheld. They also made a couple Spyro games on the handheld that had an isometric view too, and as a kid, I remember sinking a lot of hours into those games and enjoying them as well, even if they weren't the classic 3D games on the PlayStation. So we have a competent developer and a fitting engine. This should make for a decent handheld port of Jet Set Radio, but unfortunately, it doesn't. Going back to the isometric view, a lot of my complaints start with this. Before I critique it, I will say it is quite impressive that Vicarious Visions managed to put and repurpose many areas from the original games and still have it looking familiar. I managed to navigate a great deal of the game off muscle memory alone, and could probably do so in the Tony Hawk GBA games, which show a great care of detail. Despite Tony Hawk playing surprisingly well in this perspective and Jet Grind Radio having a similar gameplay motif such as grinding, tricks, and that flow retention that I mentioned back in my Jet Set Radio successes video, its environments and objectives are very different and expect different things from the player. Jet Set Radio's environments have far more grindable surfaces, as that is primarily how you gain and maintain momentum, do tricks, and reach graffiti spot. In the original, it was a lot easier to identify rails and line up jumps and tricks due to the better graphics and the ability to control the camera. Now that the GBA port is an isometric view, you'll find that a lot of rails obscured by the environment or aren't always clear as to what is above or below you. It's a very classic limitation of isometric platformers because the camera is and always will be fixed in a specific angle. So when you go to make jumps or push deeper into the environment, things can get awkward and uncomfortable, and your brain will need to start making calculated guesses as to where your character is situated on a platform and the distance between one and another platform. This is known as depth perception. Without the benefit of being able to adjust the camera to your liking to help you glide across, you end up overshooting jumps, undershooting jumps, jumping into walls, or completely missing the platform altogether. In the original Jet Set Radio, grinding did take some time to get used to, as trying to adjust your character mid-jump from rail to rail is not easy at first, but will come in time to a point where you're maintaining that state of flow and you're navigating levels with ease. Towards the final levels, still missing rails and jumps that I feel like the game is expecting me to, at this point, fully grasp it.
Firmly grasp it. Firmly grasp it! do it.
The controls try its best to solve this issue by making it so you only must tap forward on the D-pad once to move indefinitely, and allowing you to steer with just using left and right, which frees your focus more on managing steering and less on momentum.
That's good.
But the depth perception issue is still front and center, so much so that using the dash mechanic makes controlling your character frustratingly difficult, even with the added focus on steering.
Ooh, that's bad.
You know that moment when a platformer's physics finally makes sense and becomes second nature? Well, that never really happened to me in this game. Like I mentioned before, a lot of my navigation came from muscle memory and having sunk many hours into the original to know exactly where to go and how to cheese different moments. Anybody coming in this with zero context of the original would not only have to deal with the first level of the learning curve from the original, but also have to deal with the atrocious second level of learning curve from the port. Even as a seasoned elite Jet Set Radio veteran like myself found that the environmental obscured rail placement and depth perception issues made for a truly unfun experience. The combination made my eyes bleed. I know it seems like a really cheap shot to bash the Game Boy Advance for having less than stellar graphics, as it is a handheld from 2001 with a cartridge space of being 32 megabytes, and there's like optical, disc CDs out there being around 700 megabytes. Of course, it's not going to look amazing. That's not what I'm talking about. Harshly critiquing the GTA's graphics is like calling a fish stupid for not knowing how to climb a tree. My gripe isn't with the system it's on, but the perspective it is in. Jet Set Radio just cannot work well in an isometric view, as the environment requires somewhat strict accuracy and control to get from point A to point B. The Spyro GBA games work better because the level design is a lot less forgiving, and Spyro has more mechanics such as gliding and hovering that make getting to platforms less stressful. Moving on from the graphics, how does everything else hold up? Although I have classified this as a demake, Jet Set Radio on the Game Boy Advance still retains a large portion of its original content without leaving much important information on the cutting room floor, which I must admit is impressive. The story is intact minus a couple moments, the tagging mechanic is pretty much unchanged, the characters are all here, and some of the music / vocals managed to get squeezed onto the GBA cartridge too. It is a little sad to see that not all the audio could make it, because Jet Set Radio's soundtrack is a very huge component of its presentation and identity. But of course, hardware limitations will hold these things back. Keep in mind, the average MP3 file is 1 megabyte and GBA cartridges are 32 megabytes. And there are roughly around 25 songs on the soundtrack, so something will need to get cut. Surprisingly, some of the vocal sound bites made it on here, minus Professor K's dialogue. I'm sure even that, after all the compressing, bit crushing and looping, that the audio probably took up a great deal of space on that cartridge. And for that, I would have to praise them for at least doing what they can with what they have. I was playing a majority of this game on headphones, and I could hear that most of the music still maintains some of its bass and clarity, so it's kind of impressive. The tagging has also remained largely unchanged on here, which is a good and a bad thing. It's good that we have it with little to no compromises, but bad that we don't have an analog stick to perform many half circle and full circle motions that you will need to perform on a GBA D-pad. It is not the GBA shortcomings which is the problem, but what the game is expecting us to do with this limitation. Let's be honest, the Dreamcast analog stick wasn't great. Its hard plastic was not comfortable and wasn't concave, which meant your thumb could just easily slip off in the heat of gameplay. Regardless, you still had a full 360 motion, which made tagging easier. What they could have done instead was remove the circle motions and replace them with a standard up, down, left, right, and have different combinations instead. It also doesn't help that you must hold down the D-pad in a gradual motion to perform the tags, meaning that once you memorize the combination, you cannot input it as fast as possible as you would on the Dreamcast version. You're now stuck at this snail pace performing circle inputs, which isn't fun when you have multiple enemies chasing you down and hitting you with no invincibility respite. This issue becomes more apparent during later levels when the time limits get a lot shorter and there's very little moments to mess up. I don't think this was a hardware issue, as I've played Super Street Fighter 2 and Tekken Advance on this system, which are games that require quick inputs, and I had very little trouble with that. I could be wrong, but I feel like this doesn't need to be this slow and would have made the game flow a little bit better. Speaking of slow, this game does have some performance issues, such as frequent slowdowns that can mess up your timing on tricks. It's not very frequent, but enough to stick out. There are also game-breaking bugs where grinding on a certain rail causes the game to freeze, which leads to multiple resets. I think it has something to do with the collision sort of physics and how you hit the rail and how you hit a wall afterwards. It's very weird. Whilst browsing on YouTube for more footage, I was surprised to see that many people had fun with this game and admired the novelty of a portable jet set radio. Good for them. I wish I shared the same sentiment, but I don't. I do not like this game. However, if I had to give it some praise, and you know, this is really hard for me to do, I will say that the fact that there is a jet set radio game on a handheld with only a handful of downgrades is pretty amazing. If you only wanted a jet set radio that you could just take on the go for novelty and convenient purposes, then this is the game for you. You basically have the meat and potatoes of the game in your GBA, which is a great thing, but just not to the fully polished experience on the Dreamcast. The same could probably be said about the Tony Hawk games on the GBA as well. Overall, I am not a fan of this game, largely due to its isometric view and control, so much so that I can't even enjoy the novelty. It can't even win me over. Then again, the Steam Deck is a thing and Jet Set Radio is on Steam, so who knows, maybe we might be able to get a perfect Jet Set Radio portable experience. But that's all I have to say about this game. Thanks for watching, have a good one. Comment down below what other games you want me to kind of talk about from these two series, or just Dreamcast in general. You know, I've got a lot of time on my hands. Anyway, catch you on the next video. Peace out. Bye.